My parents favored my twin sister so much that they blew my wedding fund on her, so I cut them off after rejecting Mom's selfish demand. Hey everyone, before we dive in, I have a quick favor to ask. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. I, 23F, have a twin sister, Allison, who I'm not on good terms with. Scratch that. I'm not even on speaking terms with her, and neither with my parents. We used to be at least on talking terms, in spite of the way I've been treated in the past. But for the last 2 years, I've kept my distance. They hadn't bothered to reach out to me either. Until recently. Allison is 12 minutes older than me, and by default, the golden child because she's older. My parents only wanted one kid because that's what they had planned for, and they didn't have the means to raise two. But by the time they found out, it was too late, and Mom didn't want to risk anything. I found out about this around the time I was in high school from my drunk uncle at a Thanksgiving party, and that was pretty much the day I stopped trying to win my parents over. They'd done the most natural thing somebody in those circumstances could do. Gave birth to 2 kids and decided that only one of them would be loved. That happened to be Allison, not me. Right from when we were kids, the sibling rivalry between me and Allison was insane. Everything she could do, I'd try to do better, just to impress our parents. But they just seemed to hate me more for outdoing their golden child. And I'll be honest, Allison really wasn't interested in being better than me. She just wanted people to validate her, so she'd pretend she cared about the competition we had going on. I'll admit that she was good at manipulation and making people believe that she actually felt hurt when I did things better, which led to a lot of people validating her feelings and putting me down to make her feel better. These people included my parents, a couple of our relatives, and even some people from high school. So to conclude, what I got out of the competition was good grades and lots of co-curriculars so I could be better than my sister. And what she got out of this was my parents' and other people's attention, validation, and sympathy because I was clearly the bad guy for making her feel less. Looking back, I don't think I would trade that, but I sure would like to rub it in her face more than I had at the time. Then, 2 years ago, we celebrated our 21st birthday. Both of us had graduated by then. She'd graduated from a regular college, but I'd graduated from one of the top business schools in the state. Not only that, I'd also been the valedictorian and had also been on a scholarship, which meant that my parents had saved quite a lot on my education. And call me crazy, but I actually expected my parents to be happy about it. They weren't, and only paid attention to Allison and her future because she had barely scraped by. Both of us had moved back home, but while I was working from home at a firm as an intern already, Allison was still looking for jobs and getting rejected left and right. My parents cared more about that and hadn't even bothered to congratulate me or anything. I couldn't say I was surprised, but I sure was disappointed. I tried to hide it because, at the time, I was still living with my parents and hadn't saved up enough to move out yet. So I decided I'd just keep my mouth shut about my feelings. But after our 21st birthday, I just couldn't anymore. I expected them to do something big for us, but the day before our birthday, I discovered that everyone had left me home alone. All that they'd left for me was a note that said they were heading to the beach with Allison and her friends and would be back after a couple of days. I still remember being absolutely shattered when I read that note because they'd taken Allison and her friends on a beach trip, while all I got was a happy birthday note and a $50 gift card. A lot of things had been unfair about my childhood, but that was where I drew the line. It was just so hugely disappointing and heartless of them that I decided to move out that day and never look back. I had a couple of friends who were willing to let me stay with them until I found a place of my own and could afford it, which wouldn't take long because the firm I was interning at was probably going to hire me after the internship was over. So I just needed a place to live for 2 months at most. I packed my stuff and moved in with a friend of mine without telling my parents or sister and haven't looked back even once. Neither did they miss me enough to ask me to come back. They did call me on my birthday the day after I moved out, but not to wish me. They wanted to tell me that they'd be back soon and said that I should probably get a plumber to get the tap fixed. I told them that I wasn't living at home anymore and that I'd moved out, thinking that at least that information would get a reaction out of them, but with no such luck. My parents seemed all right with it, and Allison didn't care. So that was it. That was the last time I had a proper conversation with my family. Since then, I haven't gone back to see them, and neither have I heard from them. I did hear about Allison sometimes from my friends a couple of times, and that's how I stayed updated on her life. But that's about it. They didn't know anything about my parents, and my parents didn't know anything about me. I've worked hard over the past 2 years, and now I have a place of my own. It's not a mansion, but it's a nice apartment in a good neighborhood. The rent is affordable with my income, which is great because most people my age haven't been able to get here so quickly. I'm happy with how my life has turned out, and I've tried my best to keep my family out of my head. I know that Allison got married a couple of months ago to some businessman, almost 10 years older than her, and is now living it up in California. I thought all was okay with my family, but 2 days ago I received a call from my uncle telling me that I had to come visit my parents quickly because they'd been in a really bad car crash and wanted to see me. I rushed to the hospital as soon as I could because, of course, I'm not that heartless. On reaching, I found out that they'd already been in the hospital for a couple of days and were healing from their injuries. A truck had hit their car, and they'd survived but with serious injuries. They didn't have health insurance because my dad had always believed that if we just took care of ourselves, we wouldn't need the hospital at all, which is by far one of the most idiotic takes I've ever heard. They'd first contacted my sister, but she told them that she wasn't going to come back, and neither was she going to help them. Apparently, it was tacky of our parents to ask for financial help from their rich son-in-law so soon after their wedding, and she didn't want to seem like she was a gold digger to her husband. She didn't want to fly back either because she couldn't just abandon her home and her 2 kids, who weren't even her own. They were her husband's kids from a previous marriage. But she was too busy playing happy family with her husband's family to come see her own parents in the hospital after a terrible car accident. But it's not like she could have helped them with the bills, even if she wanted to, because if her husband wasn't there for her, she wouldn't have been able to afford even the flight tickets back home, seeing as how she's just a stay-at-home mom now to kids who aren't even her own. So much for being the favorite daughter and the golden child. I couldn't believe that they hadn't even had the decency to call me first. But it got even more infuriating when my uncle said that my parents now wanted me to cover their medical expenses. It's obviously a huge amount, and it'll take me a long time to recover from a financial loss like that. I don't want to have to spend so much, especially on people who never cared for me or showed me any love my entire life. I know they have other family to take care of them, and even if I don't pay for them, someone else will. It's just that it'll probably be more humiliating for them to take money from others. And they'll definitely have to return it a lot sooner than they would have had to return the money to me. At least that's what they told me while requesting me to cover the bills, and even promised that I'd have the money back in no time. So I don't know. I'm in a tough spot right now. I can either humiliate my parents by refusing to pay their medical bills and look out for myself, or I can pay for them, lose out on my own money, and then keep waiting for them to return that amount. If I'm going to be totally honest, I'm not inclined to pay for them at all. We haven't spoken in the last 2 years, and things have been bad between me and my family for as long as I can remember. They're as good as strangers to me now, so I don't feel very compelled to help them out right now. But then that would mean I'm no better than Allison, which would suck. So ATF for not wanting to help my parents pay their hospital bills after they were in a really bad car accident. Update 1. Hey there, I decided not to help my parents. It was a really hard thing to do, but to be honest, I knew their bills would be taken care of, so they had nothing to be worried about. They'd only asked me because they didn't want to ask their other relatives and were being too egoistic. I haven't told them about it yet, though, because how do you even tell your family that you're not going to be helping your parents cover their medical expenses after they've been in such a terrible accident? It's been almost 5 days since I met them, and after reading the comments, I realized that I was still subconsciously competing with Allison. She didn't help our parents, so I felt the need to step up and prove that I was the better daughter or whatever. I guess I won't ever be able to get rid of that competitive streak no matter how hard I try. It's just who I am now. Most of the comments did say that it was stupid of my parents to not have health insurance, and I agree. It was really stupid of my father to discourage that. And had I been part of their lives, I would have made sure that he got insurance. He didn't even have his car insured because he thought he was that great of a driver. They're lucky that the accident was the truck driver's fault, because otherwise the cost of the car repairs would also be coming from their own pockets. Coming to their financial situation, which a lot of you had asked about, to come to a conclusion, I'd say that my parents are okay. They're not rich, they're not poor. My dad is the sales head of the company he works in, and my mother works in HR, but at a smaller firm. Their combined income is enough for them, and since they no longer have to support me or Allison, I'd say they have sufficient means. Growing up, Allison and I didn't have to worry about money, but of course, we couldn't live extravagantly either. We were in the middle, and we still are, but I can't figure out why my parents won't be able to pay their bills themselves. If they can borrow money and promise to return it eventually, then surely they can just pay the bills themselves. They haven't told me the reason why either, and I don't think I'll be able to find out after this. Update 2. I told my parents that I won't be covering their expenses. They'd been calling me for the past week, and yesterday I finally realized that I couldn't just ignore them and let this go on until they were out of the hospital. So I answered their calls and told them that I'd thought about it and didn't think I felt the need to help them. As expected, they didn't take it very well and were very angry about it. My mom totally tore into me and yelled at me as loudly as was possible for her with her broken ribs, called me ungrateful and stuff, the usual. My dad just told me that I was no longer their daughter and disconnected the call after my mom was done yelling at me. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would because I hadn't been their daughter for a really long time. I mean, I can't even remember the last time I felt loved by my parents, and they hadn't spoken to me on purpose or checked up on me for 2 years just because I'd moved out after they'd ignored me on an important birthday. So I'd never had parents anyway. I'm just going to lead my life the way I was for the last 2 years, and probably even before that. This doesn't make that big of a difference to me like my parents had thought it would. Unfortunately, my uncle did call me after the phone call with my parents to give me another earful, but I hung up after the first couple of seconds because I didn't need this from others too. They could think whatever they wanted about me. It just didn't matter to me at this point. My uncle then texted me to inform me that they still had another family to arrange the money from, and that since it had come to this now, my parents had decided to use the money from the fund they'd set aside for our weddings. They'd already blown more than half of the wedding fund on Allison's wedding, and whatever little money they had left after that, they'd spent on a Europe trip, which is why now they barely had any savings left, and that's why they couldn't pay for themselves. So that's one mystery solved. Of course, my uncle had told me everything to make me feel bad, but all it made me feel was relief that I hadn't spent my hard-earned money on my parents' bills. They'd spent their own savings irresponsibly, and that wasn't my fault. Their not having insurance because of their own delusional beliefs was also not my fault. Now they could borrow money from their relatives or go to hell, but I wasn't giving them anything. They weren't entitled to anything of mine anymore. Not my time, and definitely not my money. Update 3. Hey, so something really weird happened today, and I need to get this off my chest. I haven't been able to tell my friends about anything that's been happening with me, because most people I know right now haven't known me for long, and I don't think I want to reveal anything about my history with my family to these people right now. So Reddit is all I have. Anyway, it's been almost 2 weeks since I last spoke to my parents. A couple of hours back, around the evening, Allison showed up at my place, and I was surprised by her sudden visit. Firstly, because I didn't think she'd know where I was living. but one of our old friends from high school told her the neighborhood I lived in, and she did some asking around to find out where I was, which was a lot of effort for her to undertake to meet me, of all people. She also looks and acts very differently from what I remembered. She's become more refined and sophisticated, I think. And that's been a huge difference, because earlier she used to talk like she was still in high school. But now she sounds more ladylike somehow and even behaves better. Her way of dressing has changed, the jewelry she wears has changed, and even her makeup. It actually felt like I wasn't even talking to Allison today. Everything about her is aged all of a sudden, but one thing that hasn't changed is how she is as a person. I guess you cannot put makeup on your heart and tell people to call it Mrs. Davis like she did with herself. Her personality and beliefs haven't undergone any renovation for sure. I let her in after she knocked at my door, and I was really surprised to see her, but I was also curious to know why she'd come by. So I decided to talk to her, after some small talk about her life, where she told me everything that she'd been up to, unprompted, and bragged about how fabulous her life was as a stay-at-home mom of 2 toddlers, married to a wealthy guy without anything to worry about except for her cuticles. I waited for her to get to the point while politely nodding at her boring speech about how wonderfully underrated being a traditional housewife was. She was even advising me to do the same. So I really couldn't wait for her to finish talking about irrelevant things and get to the damn point. Which she did, after about 15 minutes of talking about her life. She told me that she'd come back here on her own because our parents had apparently been begging her to come see them after the accident. They didn't want her money, but just wanted her to be there for them. And so after 2 weeks, she'd finally come back and figured she'd come to see me too, so we could bury the hatchet. So far, so good. But then she started complaining about how needy our parents were and that they were being disrespectful of her new family. She went on and on about how she had to abandon her 2 babies with their nanny just so she could visit them, and that she hated our parents for making her choose between them and her kids. I'll never be able to make sense of why exactly she keeps referring to them as her kids when they're obviously not hers. She told me a lot about her marriage and her husband, even though I hadn't asked, and from what I'd gathered, the guy she'd married had probably only married her to increase his chance of getting at least partial custody of his kids, which he did, but she thought that he actually loved her or something. He'd been in the custody battle for quite some time now, and since he was a full-time businessman, he didn't have enough time to spare for his kids. His ex-wife was using that against him, but then he announced that he was engaged and was getting married as soon as the divorce came through, and that tilted the scales for him. Allison told me all of this while bragging about how she had saved those kids. But it just sounded to me like her husband had used her. They hadn't even known each other for more than a year when he asked her to marry him, so it was very clear that he was not in love with her. Nobody fell in love that quickly, especially after a divorce. But she seemed blissfully unaware of it. Or maybe she knew that he didn't, but was willing to look past that because of the huge bank balance and was okay with being a glorified nanny to her husband's kids. In addition to that, she was mad at our own parents for wanting her to be by their side after they'd been in a really bad accident, because that was somehow taking away from her time with her new family, which comprised a husband who probably didn't even love her much, and 2 kids who were not related to her at all and were doing just as fine with their nanny as they were with her. If the word ungrateful ever had a face, it would be Allison's. I'm no fan of my parents myself, but honestly, when she was talking to me about how they were being too needy, I couldn't even believe that this was the girl they'd rejected me over and over again for. Then she got to the point of her visit and told me that she'd be leaving in 2 days. She'd promised Mom and Dad that she'd stay for at least a month, but she claimed that she was already bored of listening to them talk about the accident and how they'd had the worst experience of their lives for the 10th time and needed to get back home soon. So now she wanted me to reconcile with them and take her place because she didn't want to feel the guilt of knowing that she'd abandoned her parents when they needed her to be there for them. She didn't know that they'd cut me off yet again because I refused to help them with the bills, probably because they don't talk about me or even think of me, so they didn't bring that up with Allison. She was here because she wanted sympathy from me, because she'd had to deal with our parents and had to abandon her family, and now wanted to use that sympathy for her own gain and make me step into her shoes and become our parents' emotional support because she didn't feel up to the task. It was just classic Allison manipulation, but I knew it all too well and didn't fall for it. I also had no intention of telling her that while she was at my house, which would inevitably lead to a fight, so I told her that I'd try, but I know I won't. She left after telling me to keep in touch, but we both know she doesn't mean that. I was actually glad to see the back of her, because not only was she a terrible and narcissistic person, but she was also really boring to talk to. I could barely get a word in while she droned on about her uninteresting life in California. It basically just revolves around parties, her stepchildren, and her husband. She thinks she's living the life, but I thought it was really sad, since clearly her husband doesn't love her, and her kids spend half of their time with their mom anyway. So of course they're going to grow up to prefer their bio mom over Allison, and probably do so even now, from what I heard. Hurt, but it's okay, because that's the life she chose for herself. And the life I choose for myself is going to be one that is far, far away from my family, because they're really undeserving of even a quarter of my attention or sympathy. If anything, today taught me that I've been right to distance myself from my parents and my sister, because I do not want to be part of these people's lives. They're incredibly selfish and cruel, and I highly doubt they're even capable of thinking of anyone apart from themselves, especially Allison. I'm ashamed that I'm even related to such people, honestly. At least now I've been able to cut ties with all of them for good, and it isn't likely that they'll be able to get in touch with me anytime soon. I blocked Allison as soon as she left, and I've already had my parents and other relatives blocked for a couple of days now. So I think I'm safe from being troubled by my family for at least the near future. I'll pray that they don't get back in touch with me after this either, because I'm way better off without them.